Every human soul is open to an experience which is expressed by the word awakening, or rebirth, or initiation. Another important point is what esoteric science calls, quote, orientation, unquote, in the higher worlds. We achieve such an orientation when we have filled ourselves completely with the consciousness that feelings and thoughts are actual facts, just as real as tables and chairs are in the physical sensory world. In the worlds of soul and thought, feelings and thoughts affect one another just as sensory things do in the physical world. Until we are actively filled with the consciousness of the reality of thoughts and feelings, we cannot believe that entertaining a wrong thought can have as devastating an effect on the other thoughts that animate our thought world as a bullet shot blindly from a rifle has on things it hits in the physical world. Thus, although we might never allow ourselves to engage in visible actions that we consider meaningless, we nonetheless do not shrink from entertaining wrong thoughts or feelings because these do not seem to us to be dangerous to the rest of the world. To move forward on the path to higher knowledge and advance in spiritual science, we must therefore pay as careful attention to our thoughts and feelings as we do to our movements in the physical world. For instance, we do not usually try to go straight through a wall, but direct our steps around it. That is, we comply with the laws of the physical world. The world of feelings and thoughts likewise has its own laws, but they do not force themselves upon us from the outside. Rather, they must flow out of the life of the soul. For this to occur, we must never allow ourselves false thoughts and feelings. Random musings, playful daydreams, the arbitrary ebb and flow of feeling, all these must be banished from the soul. We need not fear that this will make us unfeeling. On the contrary, we will find that only when we regulate our inner life in this way do we become truly rich in feelings and creative in genuine imagination. Important feelings and fruitful thoughts will then take the place of petty indulgence in emotions and the playful association of ideas. These, in turn, will help us to orient ourselves in the spiritual world, thereby allowing us to enter into a right relationship with the things in it. And this, too, has a definite noticeable effect. Just as we find our way as physical beings amongst the things of the physical world, so now our path leads us through the phenomena of growing and dying away. As we come to know these in the manner described above, we follow the processes of growing and flourishing, decaying and dying, just as our own and the world's development require. The students of occult knowledge must also direct their attention to the world of sounds. Here we must distinguish between sounds produced by so-called inanimate objects, such as a falling object, a bell, or a musical instrument, and those coming from living beings, animals or human beings. If we hear a bell, we perceive the sound and associate it with a pleasant feeling. The scream of an animal, on the other hand, not only evokes an emotional association, but also reveals the animal's inner experience, its pleasure or its pain. In esoteric training, we focus on the second type of sound, concentrating our whole attention on the fact that the sound communicates something that lies outside our own souls. We must immerse ourselves in this, quote, otherness, end quote, and inwardly uniting our feelings with the pain or pleasure expressed by the sound. To do this, we must disregard what the sound is for us, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, agreeable or disagreeable. Our soul must be filled only with what is happening in the being from whom the sound comes. If we practice this exercise systematically and deliberately, we will acquire as we do so the faculty of merging, as it were, with the being that made the sound. A musically sensitive person will naturally find this particular exercise for the cultivation of soul, life, easier than one who is unmusical. But no one should think that a musical ear is a substitute for systematically doing the exercise. As occult students, our goal is to learn to feel toward the whole of nature in this way. As we learn to do so, a new faculty takes root in the world of feeling and thought. All of nature begins to whisper its secrets to us through its sounds. Sounds that were previously incomprehensible to our soul now become the meaningful language of nature. Where we had heard only noise in the sounds produced by inanimate objects, we now learn a new language of the soul. As this cultivation of our feelings continues, we become aware that we can hear things we never conceived of before. Indeed, we begin to hear with our own souls. Something must be added to this practice before the highest point in this region of soul experience can be attained. Particularly important as we develop as occult pupils is that we also work on the way we listen to other people when they speak. On the path to higher knowledge, this listening skill is extremely important. We must become accustomed to listening in such a way that we quiet our own inner life completely when we listen. For example, when someone expresses an opinion and another listens, agreement or disagreement usually stirs immediately within the listener. Often, in such a situation, we feel compelled to express our own opinion at once, especially if we disagree. However, on the path to higher knowledge, we must learn to silence any agreement or disagreement with the opinions we hear. Naturally, this does not mean that we should suddenly change our way of life and strive to achieve this complete inner silence all the time. We must start with isolated instances that we choose intentionally. Then, quite slowly and gradually, as if by itself, this new way of listening will become a habit. In spiritual research, we practice this way of listening in a systematic way. As students, we should feel it our duty to set aside as an exercise certain times when we listen to the most contrary opinions, completely silencing within us all agreement and, especially, all negative judgments. Not only must we silence our intellectual judgment, but also any feelings of disapproval, rejection, or even agreement. Above all, we must observe ourselves carefully to ensure that such feelings, even though absent from the surface of the soul, are not present in its innermost depths. For example, we must learn to listen to the remarks of those who are in some way inferior to us, suppressing every feeling of superiority or knowing better. Listening to children in this way is especially useful, and even the wisest of us can learn a great deal from them. These exercises teach us to listen selflessly to the words of others, completely excluding our own personality, opinions, and feelings. Once we are practiced in listening in this way without criticism, then gradually, even when the most contradictory views and illogical statements are aired before us, we begin to learn how to unite ourselves with the being of the other person and fully enter into it. We begin to hear through the words into the other person's soul. As we consistently practice this new habit, sound becomes the medium through which we can perceive soul and spirit. This practice requires the strictest self-discipline, but it also leads to a lofty goal. For when the exercise is combined with those given above in connection with sounds in nature, then a new sense of hearing comes to life in the soul. The soul becomes capable of hearing, quote, words, unquote, from the spiritual world that are not expressed in outer tones and cannot be heard by physical ears. Perception of the, quote, inner word, unquote, awakens. Truths are gradually revealed to us out of the spiritual world. We hear ourselves spoken to spiritually. All higher truths are attained only through such inward prompting. Whatever we hear from the lips of true spiritual researchers is only what they have brought into experience in this way. This does not mean that it is unnecessary to study esoteric literature before we ourselves have become able to hear this, quote, inner word, unquote. On the contrary, reading such writings and listening to the teachings of esoteric researchers are themselves a means of achieving knowledge for ourselves. Indeed, every statement of spiritual science that we hear is intended to guide the mind in the direction it must take if the soul is to experience any true progress. Therefore, the exercises described here should be accompanied by the intensive study of what researchers in spiritual science bring into the world. Such study is part of the preparatory work in all schools of esoteric training. In fact, all the other methods taken together will not get us anywhere if we do not also absorb the teachings of esoteric researchers. These teachings are drawn forth from the living, quote, inner word, unquote, from, quote, living inspiration, unquote, and therefore they themselves are spiritually alive. They are not just words, they are living forces, and as we follow the words of one experienced in the esoteric knowledge or read a book based on true inner experience, forces are at work in our souls that make us seers, or clairvoyants, just as the forces of nature have shaped our eyes and ears out of living matter.